Yes, well, I'm sure most of you have heard already. The recent update in regards to Errol Spence, him flipping that car over, and what's happening now. Errol Spence Jr. charged with DWI stemming from crash, and this comes as no surprise to me or you. You know, I figured. Guy's leaving a club at 3, 4 in the morning, no seatbelt on, going 100 miles per hour down the boulevard. Odds are, this guy's drunk. And given Errol Spence's reputation for liking the bottle, liking the drink, it was likely, it seemed very likely, highly probable that this guy was drunk behind the wheel. I mean, given the nature of the crash, the time at which it occurred, Errol Spence's reputation for liking the bottle, you didn't exactly have to be Columbo to piece this puzzle together, and yet
people argue.
The usual suspects were arguing in defense of Errol Spence, his character, his upstanding reputation as a law-abiding citizen. You don't know if he was drunk. You don't know that. I mean, look, dog, this isn't complicated. That's the natural inference anyone would make.
Anyone with a brain.
Anyone with a brain, that is. And yet there were people out there arguing about this shit. I mean, the news here, in all honesty, the news here isn't that, he's going to be charged with a DWI. Anybody with a set of eyes could have seen that one coming. The news here is that, when Sergei Kovalev crashed his car over there in Russia, I believe it was. He crashed his car, and Sergei has a reputation for liking the bottle the same way that Errol Spence does. And when that accident happened, when that vehicular accident happened involving Sergei Kovalev, you didn't see a faction of fans rushing to his defense, trying to explain away what could have happened, giving him the benefit of the doubt. You didn't see that. And it's because, in all likelihood, this guy was likely drunk behind the wheel. He's got a reputation for being a drinker. He's known for drinking in camp. Thus, him being drunk at the time the accident took place, his drinking habits,
that's what did it,
being the cause of the accident itself, it was the natural inference for anyone to make. But when it's Errol Spence, these motherfuckers wanted people to act like somehow it's different.
It's not.
I mean, he's leaving a club at 3, 4 in the morning? What do you think he was knocking back at the club? Warm glasses of milk?
Around the juice boxes on me.
I mean, what, you think he's in there drinking Capri Suns and fruit punch? You think he was hopped up on high C when he took the podium and started ranting about Crawford and how Crawford's got to come to his side of the street? Is that what you think was going on? Sugar rush? It's pretty obvious what was going on with Errol Spence. And the real news here isn't even so much that Errol Spence is being hit with a DWI, that he was driving while under the influence. That's really not the news. I mean, that's mundane. We put that together before this news broke, that this guy was likely drunk. That's not the news. The news is that faction of fight fans, that small section of the boxing community that feels so inclined to argue the most asinine of asinine talking points just to be wrong anyway. I mean, these guys will argue about this kind of stuff for hours. Just to be wrong about it, just to be wrong. You have to wonder what exactly goes on in these people's minds. What is the psychology of this kind of a person that constantly feels the need to argue these straw man arguments just to be wrong anyway, and they persist. They continue to do it. They took
this proposition,
people saying that Errol might have been drunk at the time of the accident, they took that as an attack on his character. You hating on him, you hating. I'm just speaking facts, man. This guy, he's known to like to drink. Okay, every time we see him in the public eye now, when he's not in the ring, when he's outside of the ring, every time we see this guy, he's fucking drunk. I'm not saying he's a bad guy. I'm not saying he's fucking, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I'm just saying that this guy, he does have a habit of being drunk in public. And with those things in mind, given that he was coming from the club at 3 in the morning, going 100 miles an hour, and the Ferrari flip, okay? These things in mind, these aforementioned factors in mind, it's likely this guy was drunk. Now you want to probably argue about, well, he wasn't that drunk. He was drunk enough to flip a fucking Ferrari, okay? I'd say he was pretty fucking drunk. You're a little tipsy. You get a little bit of liquid courage, you might flip somebody the bird. Errol Spence, however, flipped a fucking Ferrari, so I'd say he had more than just a little liquid courage. Now, don't expect these guys and gals that were arguing for 2, 3, 4 days on Twitter, on YouTube, on Facebook about how Spence couldn't have been drunk. No, you just saying that to attack his character.
No!
Don't expect those people to show any kind of accountability. They're not known for it, and that is not going to change. I think that what chapped their little asses, got their little butts all hurt, is the implications of what Errol Spence did. They don't just affect him, you understand. I mean,
They don't.
You know,
Driving drunk.
driving while intoxicated, it doesn't just affect the guy behind the wheel. I mean, you are endangering the lives of other oncoming motorists with your reckless behavior. You're endangering many people by doing this. And it's likely for this reason that these cartoon characters felt so inclined to defend Errol Spence's behavior when they should be chastising him for it. I mean, I think we're all glad that Errol Spence survived. I think we're all glad. I think we all breathed a sigh of relief when we heard that he walked away almost unscathed. That the most he suffered as a result of the accident were some facial lacerations, but he didn't suffer any broken bones, no irreparable damage, and at some point he may just be able to resume his career. I think we all breathed a sigh of relief when we got that news. I was happy about it, but at the end of the day there is something to be addressed about this kind of reckless behavior, because now what you're doing, it doesn't just affect you. It just, all it takes for a car accident to happen is one asshole losing control of what he's doing because of his reckless behavior. You're endangering the lives of a lot of people. And these are the implications of that DWI. And this is likely why these morons, instead of chastising Spence for what he was doing, instead of that, they rushed to his defense. Because, like I said before, these kinds of people are enablers. They're not part of the solution. They're part of the problem. These are the kind of people that Errol Spence likely has in his entourage. 10, 20, 30 guys telling you how great that you are, They're telling you how great you are, but not a single one of them thinks to call you a fucking Uber when you leave the club at 3, 4 in the morning, whatever it was, Not a single one. Kind of guys, kind of gals, they ain't good for nothing, okay? They'll tell you how great you are all day. They just want to bask in your glow. But when it counts, they count for nothing. I mean, that's all I'm left to reflect upon. That Errol Spence really needs to rethink, reevaluate what his priorities are. Because he could have lost more than just his boxing career as a result of his reckless behavior. He could have lost a lot more than that. And he's not some, 20-year-old kid, 21, 22. No, Errol Spence is of age, okay? This is what, 29, 30-year-old man? He's got mouths to feed. He's got kids, this guy, okay? You're supposed to be at the top of your game, at the pinnacle of your career. And this is what you're doing?
Get it together.
At the end of the day, it's really not a shock to me. I'm just here to say, I told you so.
I told you so.
In other news, earlier this week, I'm sure most of you have heard already, that the Crawford versus Kavaliauskas fight was announced. And that's going to be a big card. That's going to be a big card because Mick Conlon is going to get his chance to get revenge on Nikitin for what happened in the amateur ranks. And just as well, Teofimo Lopez is in fact going to be challenging Richard Commey for what is the red belt at 135 pounds. That's an important fight, a fight that we haven't talked about in a little while.
There's a lot going on.
Teofimo himself was quoted as saying that it's going to be lights out for Richard Commey, and that he being Teofimo Lopez, will take over at 135 pounds. And I'm going to be honest when I say that I half expected Teofimo to double back on this fight. Given the arduous task he had in front of him with Masayoshi Nakatani, I questioned as to whether or not Teofimo could keep the same energy he had been exhibiting up until that point, that he wants a Vasyl Lomachenko fight, and he's doing what he's got to do to line himself up for that fight. Given that the Masayoshi Nakatani fight was actually a little bit difficult for Teofimo. I mean, he actually faced some adversity against Masayoshi. I kind of wondered, I questioned as to whether or not Teofimo still wanted that opportunity with Vasyl Lomachenko, given that nobody considers Masayoshi Nakatani a pound-for-pound fighter in any respect, and yet against this fighter, Teofimo struggled. In light of that kind of a situation, you wonder, can the fighter keep the same energy that he had been exhibiting, given the adversity that he just faced? But, you gotta give it to Teofimo. He's showing gumption here. He really is. He's sticking to his guns, and he's doing what he's got to do to get that fight, to get that Vasyl Lomachenko fight, because that's what this is a segue to at the end of the day. We know that Vasyl Lomachenko is on a mission to capture all the belts.
All the belts.
And we also know that the last remaining belt for Vasyl Lomachenko to collect is, in fact, the red belt. The red belt that Teofimo is challenging Richard Commey for. So in that way, Teofimo has been true to his word. He's been true to his word, even though he really doesn't have to be. I mean, he could have doubled back. He could have decided to, slow things down in his career. This kid's only 14-0. You do realize that, right? There's guys out there, they don't fight for a world title till they're 20, 26-0, sometimes 30-0, sometimes more than that. Takes some guys a long time to fight for a world title, whereas Teofimo Lopez, who's already a young guy with only 14 pro fights, he so chooses to push forward, to put forth the effort to
Show up and show out.
make good on his word that he wants that Vasyl Lomachenko fight. Because if he beats Richard Commey, if he gets the red belt, that's what's going to happen. You know? And Teofimo, you know, at 14-0, let me put it to you this way. 14-0, young guy. This kind of a situation, a fighter can actually afford to take his foot off the gas, to slow things down, because Teofimo, unlike Vasyl Lomachenko, he's not an Olympic gold medalist, let alone a double gold medalist. You know, Teofimo's not a double gold medalist like Vasyl Lomachenko, like Guillermo Rigondeaux, like Clarissa Shields. I mean, these kinds of fighters are the kinds of fighters that when they turn pro, they hit the ground running because they have this wealth of amateur experience. Thus, there's no need for the bring-along process, these kinds of fighters. But Teofimo, he's not one of those guys. So he could actually decide to take his foot off the gas, slow things down, and amass more pro experience before challenging for a world title. And yet, he has opted to push forward, to have that Richard Commey fight. And that's a dangerous fight, man. Richard Commey is a guy that comes to bring it. And he's a big puncher. He's a big puncher at that weight. It's basically saying that if Teofimo Lopez has any aspirations of becoming a world champion, he's going to have to go through the fire to do it and prove himself. That, ladies and gentlemen, is admirable. That's commendable. That garners respect. The fact that he's not one of these guys trying to perpetrate on the boxing community by clout chasing a guy, name dropping him without having any actual intention of fighting him. No. Teofimo Lopez is in fact aligning himself for Vasyl Lomachenko. He is keeping the same energy. I just question as to whether or not he'll make it that far, because what lies in front of him is a puncher, is a live animal, a reigning champion that really comes to fight. You know, you wonder that Teofimo is he ready for this fight? I don't know. But I respect what he's doing. I respect that he's keeping the same energy. And I think that's going to be a hell of a card, in all honesty, between Conlon versus Nikitin in the pro ranks, Teofimo versus Commey for the red belt, and Crawford keeping busy with his mandatory challenger, Egidius Gavaliauskas. I'd say that this is going to be a solid card. I think this is going to get some good viewership, and I look forward to seeing it. And finally, the WBC's 130-pound champion, Miguel Berchelt, consensus number 1 at the weight. He says that after this upcoming Sosa fight, he would like to fight Oscar Valdez. In the article, he talks about how, you know, obviously he wants to fight Valdez after Sosa, and then he means to relinquish his belt and move up to 135. 135 to fight the likes of Vasyl Lomachenko. What do I think about this? I'll tell you the truth that, you know, look, Miguel Berchelt's a great fighter. Consensus number 1 at 130 pounds. He's already got one of the best, if not the best, resume at the weight. But there is a bit of wiggle room for criticism when he's more interested in facing the likes of an Oscar Valdez, who's proven absolutely nothing at 130 pounds, okay? This guy's moving up from 126, and he's yet to make a splash at 130. There's something to be said when you see Miguel Berchelt is more interested in fighting that guy than he was in facing the WBO's 130-pound champion, Jamel Herring. I mean, how are we supposed to treat this? How are we supposed to look at this? You know that Oscar Valdez, great kid, solid champion at 126. But what the fuck has he done at 130 that Miguel's more interested in facing him as opposed to Jamel? Jamel's got a world title for you to win. A world title for you to add to your collection, yet for some reason, you're more interested in a little guy moving up. How are we supposed to classify that? What are we supposed to call it? You know, Oscar Valdez is a good fighter. I got nothing against the kid, I don't. He's all offense, and he's an action guy. But defensively, there were a lot of lapses in judgment.
Gets hit.
There, you know, I mean, I've talked about it in the past that, you know, he needs to clean it up. He's a young guy. He can't go on taking that much punishment fight by fight, because that will take away years from his career. And you have to wonder that maybe this is why Miguel is more interested in fighting him as opposed to a more defensively responsible fighter, defensively responsible champion in Jamel Herring, the kind of guy who'll fight a long-distance fight, stick and move, fight behind his jab, you know? You gotta wonder if that's not the reason that Miguel's more interested in facing Oscar as opposed to Jamel, because Oscar ain't got nothing for you to win. He ain't no champion at that weight.
Jamel is.
He hasn't proven anything up there, so I mean, why do you want him more than Jamel? I mean, if you're keeping score, that would be the second time that, Miguel Berchelt chose to do something else instead of unifying. And Miguel Berchelt has proven to be the longest reigning champion at 130 pounds, okay? Longest reigning guy. A lot of world titles have changed hands over the last 2-3 years, yet he remained the Green Belt's champion, the WBC champion. And for him to leave the division this way, what? You fight Sosa? You want to fight Oscar Valdez after that? I mean, you don't want to unify? You don't want to test yourself against one of the other champions that are out there?
I guess not.
I know what people are going to say. Oh, there's more money in an Oscar Valdez fight. Oh, it's all about getting the bag. Yeah, I understand that, but that just sounds like a fancy way of saying, why take a chance on Jamel Herring when you can fight a little guy moving up? That's all I hear. That's all you're telling me, if that's the explanation that you want to give me. Now look, I got nothing against Miguel Berchelt, but there has to be some kind of consistency here, because if these were two different guys with these same circumstances, what people would be saying is that Miguel Berchelt is ducking Jamel Herring. That's what they'd be saying if it were two other guys. But in this situation, I don't see people exhibiting the same energy. What's stopping Miguel Berchelt from unifying with Jamel Herring? I mean, even if an offer wasn't made yet, why isn't Miguel pursuing it? You're the longest reigning champion. You're talking about leaving the weight class. Don't you want to knock off one of these other belt holders before you do it? This isn't like Zerto's situation, or what was Zerto's situation at super middleweight, to where you're the longest reigning champion, but you haven't unified yet. And a big part of the reason is the politics of boxing. The other guys holding belts, they're not on your side of the street. So that could be what's stifling the unification process. That's not the case when it comes to Miguel Berchelt. There's a champion on your side of the street. You just don't seem too interested in fighting him. The question is, why not? He told Jamel Herring to focus on making a name for himself. That's what he told that guy, that he was never actually offered that fight. But in regards to it, at a time when that fight is a conversation, he told Jamel Herring, hey, go make a name for yourself. So what, you told him to go make a name for himself so that you could move up without fighting him? Is that it? Is that the story? I'm sorry, but I have to talk about this. I have to highlight it. We have to keep the same energy. Otherwise, we're no better than these hashtag new media hypocrites. I don't know who would have won that fight if it went down. I don't know if Jamel would have beat Miguel or if Miguel would have beat Jamel. All I know is that I wanted to see who the best one among them is, and while Jamel seemed very interested in having that fight, Miguel did not. So what are we supposed to call that, people? You tell me. What are we supposed to call that?